Piano scales. In this lesson, I will introduce you to piano scales. Every time you play the piano, you should put into consideration the scales. To define scales, it refers to a collection of notes which are connected musically. They could be the notes of a certain key, say the key of G. It is scales that actually form the building blocks of chords. They are, however, different from chords in that they are not played simultaneously, which is the case in playing chords. Learning about scale is a great way of bringing the playing skills you already possess to a whole new level. This is because scales encourage creativity and could help you compose your own music. Playing scales is also a great way of teaching yourself how to play chords. Though we have said that scales are a group of notes, they are not the same with keys, which are also generally defined as a group of notes. This is because scales have a large diversity. They also have more notes than chords. There are minor and major scales, diatonic scales, chromatic scales, pentatonic, and many others. This offers a vast field on which music can be played. As a pianist, your focus should be on the scales that blend with the music style of your interest. For instance, if you are interested in playing blues, then the blues piano scales should be your priority. However, it is just fine to study the major scales which are the most common. Other than major scales, you will also come across minor scales. The minor scales are often divided into three forms, namely natural, harmonic, and melodic minor scales. They offer more possibilities on what you can play. You will be surprised at just how much more music you will play when you practice these scales. We shall, however, learn more about this later on. There are also pentatonic scales as well as modal scales. Does it seem like there is too much to learn about scales? Well, you can be assured that they are not hard to learn. First, let us learn about how to form major scales and minor scales. For you to successfully build scales, you will need to know about half steps and whole steps. A half step is moving from one pitch to the next immediate pitch. It is also called a semitone. For instance, if you move from F to an F sharp, from a C to a C sharp, D to D sharp, and such like, that will be a half step. It can also be the other way round, where you move from a sharp or flat to a major note. A whole step, on the other hand, refers to moving two half steps either to higher or to lower notes. For instance, when you move from C to D, G to A, or F to D, that will be moving a. How to form a major scale? Whenever you want to form major scales, just remember that they are made up of a group of 8 notes. It consists of half steps and whole steps. To make one, you simply identify the root note. Just as in chord formation, the root note gives the scale its name. After identifying the root note, all the other notes will fall into place using the following formula: whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. For instance, if you were on the key of C, the root note will be C. The scale will be referred to as C major scale. The notes in the scale will be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. You can note that from C to D is a whole step. The same with from D to E. It is, however, a half step from E to F as well as from B to C. These are the notes you will find on the C major scale and are helpful when you are forming chords as well. Let us take another example. We shall use the key of G, that means that the root note is G and the name of the scale is G major scale. Using this formula we discussed before, you will see that the notes that make up the G major scale will be G, A, B, C, D, E and F sharp. As you can see, we have jumped F and included F sharp. This is because as per the formula, the 6th and 7th notes are separated by a whole step. That means we had to jump to move 2 half steps in order to have the whole step bringing us to F sharp. Let us take another example. The key of E. Just like in the other cases we discussed before, the root note will be E. The name of the scale will be E major scale. The notes thereof will be E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp and D sharp. Using this formula, you will be able to form all manner of major scales on the piano. They will all be like in the table here on the screen. How to form a minor scale. Now you will learn how to form minor scales. These are relative to major scales. They are formed upon the 6th note of every major scale. For example, the 6th note of an A major scale is an F sharp. It therefore means the relative minor scale of A is F sharp minor. These have the same notes, only that the arrangement of the notes is different. That is actually the difference between the major and minor scales, the arrangement of notes. As we had said earlier, minor scales are of 3 types, that is natural, harmonic and melodic. Let us look at each of them separately. Natural minor scales. Natural minor scales are based on the 6th note of a major scale. They are relative to the major scales. The formula they follow in their formation is a whole step followed by a half step, then a whole step, another whole step and then a half step. The last 2 notes are obtained by moving whole steps. To simply put the formula, you will have W, H, W, W, H, W, W. For instance, the notes in an F sharp will be F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D and E. You can easily tell that these are the same notes you find on A major scale. They are only arranged in a different way. The following table on the screen shows the natural minor scales. Harmonic minor scales. These are not largely different from the natural scales. They are also formed based on the 6th note of a major scale and follow the same key signature as the major scale. The only difference is that the 7th note is raised for a half step. It means that after the last whole step, you will be needed to move a half step for it to become a harmonic minor scale. The formula will therefore look like this: W, H, W, W, H, W, W plus half step. For instance, the notes in an F sharp harmonic minor scale will therefore be F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D and F. All others will look like the table which is available on the screen. Melodic minor scale. Just like the other minor scales, these ones are also founded on the 6th note of the major scale. They are however different in that they descend or ascend for an octave. They however use the same key signature of the relative major scale. Something else to note is that whenever you are ascending, the 6th and 7th notes are each raised for a half step. They however remain unchanged whenever they are descending, just like Other forms of scales. Other than minor and major scales, there are also other forms of scales. They are such as A. Chromatic scales. Chromatic scales are a bit straightforward. You are only needed to move in half steps. You will play a lot of accidental in this form of scales. While ascending, you will play the sharps, and while descending, you will play flats. Included also will be enharmonic notes. These are simply notes that sound the same but are named differently. For instance, a G sharp and an A minor. If you want to form a chromatic scales from the key of C, the notes will look as follows. While ascending, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. While descending, C, B, B flat, A flat, G, G flat, F, E flat, D flat, C. Let us take a few example of keys and formulate their chromatic scales. All other keys will follow the same formula, and as you can possibly see, they are easy to form. B. Diatonic scales. These are the opposite of chromatic scales. It is basically built on the interval made by the notes of a natural scale. It is based on the 5 whole steps and 2 half steps. Major scales and minor scales can qualify to be diatonic scales. C. Pentatonic scales. This is a special scale characterized by having only 5 notes per octave. It is common in country music and some Chinese music. It can, however, be useful in blues piano playing as it is a great tool for improvisation. You will learn more about improvisation later on in this course. D. Blues piano scales. By the end of this course, you will learn on how to play the blues piano. You will therefore need to know on how to identify the blues piano scales. The scales you will learn are mainly minor pentatonic scales. Major scales are also there, though not very common. The blue piano scales are based on the 3 dominant chords of any scale. For instance, the dominant chords in a C major scale will be C7, F7, G7. Minor blues piano scales. To form a blues piano scale, the formula is as follows: whole and a half step, whole step, half step, half step, whole and a half step, and finally a whole step. Put in a simplified form, the formula will look like W plus half H W H H W plus half W. Using the formula, you will have your blue piano scales as available on the screen. Major blues piano scales. In order to form major blues piano scales, you will need to follow the following formula: whole step, half step, half step, whole and a half step, whole step, and finally a whole and a half step. To put that in a more simplified way, the formula will look like W. Practicing on scales. In this lesson, you will learn extra useful things concerning scales and playing on the piano generally. They are little lessons that will help you in your practicing of scales, chords, and improve your general playing expertise. Tips to help you practice on piano scales. Now that you have known about the scales, you will need to practice effectively in order for you to polish your skills. The following are tips to help you in your practice. 1. Get comfortable with the black keys first. The scales here are mostly D flat, G flat and B major. Your hands has longer and shorter fingers. It will be naturally easier for you to play with longer fingers. They alternatively will play the shorter piano keys more easily. Great pianists such as Chopin always had their students begin with the black keys before going to the white keys. 2. Practice chromatically. We have looked through the chromatic scales and seen that they are formed by moving half steps. Some people prefer to practice through the circle of fifths. While it is not bad, practicing chromatically gives you the advantage of moving your fingers in varying pattern as you change from scale to scale. In the long run, you gain great understanding of chords. 3. Practice musically. Whenever you are practicing, it is not just for fun or to just strike random keys without any aim. You should have your whole body, mind, and emotions connected to what you are doing on the keys with your fingers. Practice like you are right on a stage playing before an audience. Point 4. Develop an inner accuracy. Sometimes piano players have to use a metronome in order for them to play accurately, whereas there is nothing wrong with using a metronome. It would be better if you play without using one. For this, you will need to develop an accurate inner pulse that will help you play rhythmatically. If you play without an even rhythm or with an uneven tempo, it will be a recipe for horrible music. With practice, you will be able to develop this inner accuracy and you won't need to over rely on metronome. 5. Avoid playing too fast. A high tempo music is not in any way bad music. For your practice, however, evenness while playing is much more important than a high tempo. This is because at high tempos you may not play very smoothly. You should therefore avoid playing too fast at the beginning until you have mastered the scales, and then you can gradually test on higher tempos. 6. Learn to play without looking. The best way for you to learn the scales is by playing without having to watch your hands. Think of a visually impaired person playing the piano. They do it so beautifully, yet they don't even see the keys. How do they do it? By training their hands through a process called proprioception, that is, having your body aware of the space around it. This is a skill that will do you a lot of good and help you play smoothly and fast. It is much more essential, particularly when reading sheet music. 7. Practice regularly. This is self-explanatory. The more you practice, the better you become in the long run. Practicing scales not only warms your fingers but also your body and mind in readiness of the task of playing ahead. Practice has been a regular word throughout this course. You will need to practice faithfully and with a lot of discipline for you to see the best result. Improvising on the piano. Some of the best pianists did not learn their art by just following the written rules, but by sometimes breaking a rule and creating their own. For you to become a great pianist, you will also need to creatively create your own rules at times. This helps a lot in improvising on your playing by allowing you to follow your own ideas rather than sticking to a set of rules. That does not mean that you disregard the knowledge you have acquired on playing the piano. Instead, it should act as a guideline for you as you try to creative ways of improving your piano playing skills. The following tips will help you in improvising. A. Playing the white keys only. In a previous list where we listed the tips of helping you learn piano scales, we said you should try with the black keys first. Now, after learning that, you can improvise on your playing by doing the white keys only. The C major scale as well as the relative A minor scale are by default played using white keys only. If you begin by playing a C, emphasize it by ending with it. The same should be done with A minor key. Playing solo over chords. This is where you play individual notes and chords at the same time. For instance, you could play solo with your right hand and the whole chord on the left. This is a great way of improvising on your playing. You can also try to play a major scale with one hand and its relative minor scale on the other hand. C. Blues improvising. You will only need to learn the 12 bar blues. Later on in this course, you will learn about the 12 blue bars and how you can play about with them and enhance your improvisation. D. Superimpose scales. This is where you use scales over chords which do not fit together. For instance, you could add a whole step to a pentatonic scale. The result are a quite different sounding scale. It however sounds pretty good. Diminished chords. This is a type of chord which has 6 semitones. It spans over 5 diatonic degrees just like a perfect fifth but is narrowed by a semitone. It is this characteristic that distinguishes it from an augmented chord. A diminished chord is formed by the first note, a flattered third and a flattered fifth. That is root plus B3 plus B5. It is symbolized by DIM or small o. Using the formula above, you will get diminished chords of major scales as mentioned on the screen. Augmented chords. This one is different from the diminished chord in that it spans over 4 semitones like a perfect fourth but has an extension of semitone. An augmented chord is symbolized by the symbol aug or plus. It is formed by playing the first note or root note, the third note and a sharp fifth of a major scale, root plus third plus sharp fifth. Using this formula, you will find that the augmented chords in various keys look as mentioned on the screen. Sixth and seventh chords. A sixth chord is formed by taking the sixth note on a scale and adding it to a major chord complete with the root, third and fifth notes. For instance, if you take a G major chord and add a sixth note, it will then be called a G major sixth or simply G major 6. Please look at the screen to see how the sixth chords appear in the 12 major chords. You can also add sixth to a minor chord and it will become a minor sixth. For example, a G minor will become G minor sixth. This is done by combining the root, flat, third, the fifth and the sixth notes of a major scale. Using that sequence, the chords you will form will look what mentioned on the screen. Other than a sixth chord, there is also a seventh major chord. This is formed by adding the seventh note in a scale to a major triad. That means you play a normal chord and then add a seventh note to it. It is then symbolized by adding a 7 at the end of the triad name. For instance, to make a C7th major chord, it will have the following notes C, E, G and B. It is then written as a C major 7 or just CM7. However, if you add a flat 7 to the major triad or chord you are playing, it will then be called a dominant 7th chord instead. For the same key of C, you will have the following notes C, E, G and B. It is written as C DOM7. Please look at the screen to see the 7th chords of 12 major chords. Suspended chords. There are musical chords bringing a variation on the major or minor triads. You can have a suspended second or suspended fourth. They are often abbreviated as SUS2 and SUS4 respectively. These types of chords can include diminished and augmented chords as well. In order for you to form a suspended chord either in a major or minor triad, you will need the three main notes. The chord is formed by replacing the third note with either the second or the fourth note. For example, the three main notes in the C major chord are C, E, F. To make a suspended chord, you can replace the E with the D to have C, D, G. That will form a suspended second. You can also decide to replace the E with an F instead and end up with C, F, G. It will then be called suspended fourth. Put more simply, a suspended 2 chord means you have to play the third note a half step lower and play the root second and fifth notes. The same applies if you see a suspended 4 chord. It means you will have to play the third note a half step higher. You will therefore play the root, the fourth and the fifth notes. Look at the screen to see concept of suspended fourth for every major chord. Additionally, you will also come across chords identified as dominant 7th suspended 4th chord. For this chord, you will only need to play the root, perfect 4th, perfect 5th and a minor 7th. It is often symbolized as 7 SUS4. For the key of C, the resulting chord would therefore have the following notes: C, F, G, B, small b, and would be written as C7 suspended 4. Musical intervals. When you talk about semitones, half step or whole steps on a piano, you are referring to musical intervals. These are the difference in pitch on the piano. For instance, all the notes of a D major scale are intervals. The smallest interval is a half step while the largest is an 8, also called an octave. A grand piano has 88 intervals from either side. You can play the notes one by one or together in a group. When you play them one by one, it's called a melodic interval, and when you play them together, it is called a harmonic interval. Intervals are important as they help in the formation of the different type of chords. When you move from a white key to another white key, it is considered to be a whole step. However, you may have to move exercise. Piano scales. Using the WWH formula, build all the 12 major scales. Identify the whole steps, half steps, and the notes contained in each scale. After getting the notes of the scale, try to formulate chords. Do you remember on how to form chords? Use that knowledge here and create chords from the scales. Using the formula WHWWHWW, build all the 12 minor scales. Identify the relative scales. From the results we have discussed before, what relationship do you see between them? Identify the relative scales of all the major scales. Minor scales. The minor scales are divided into three forms: the natural minor scales, the harmonic, and the melodic. Formulate scales of each type using their respective formula. What is the relationship or difference between the three forms of minor scales? Identify and form chromatic scales for your piano. How do they differ from the other forms of scales? Play them on your keyboard and observe the difference in sound. Other scales. Formulate diatonic scales and play them on your keyboard. Identify, form, and play pentatonic scales on your piano. Can you identify the difference in sound between the diatonic and pentatonic scales? Practice to play different scales using the skill improvement tips we learn in the piano scales lesson. Focus towards playing without having to rely on a metronome to keep tempo. Work towards developing the accurate inner pulse. Moreover, focus on playing without having to look down at your hands. Identify the blues piano minor and major scales using the formula W plus half H W H H W plus half W and W H H W plus half W W plus half respectively. Play each of the scales you have identified. Have you seen a difference or similarity in sound between the blues piano scales and the other types of scales? Practice the different techniques you can also use to improvise playing at the piano. You can also practice with your favorite song and improvise the original chords. How does it sound? Do you think it sounds appealing? Identify and formulate diminished chords on the piano. Also formulate diminished chords. Play each of them. How do they sound? Identify the variance in sound. Formulate and identify sixth and seventh chords. Play each of them and practice to use them on a song. Identify and create suspended chords. Make sure you form a suspended seconds and suspended fourths. Play each of them. Notice the difference in